I got a request through asking me to discuss like a sort of general overview of Keith Thurman, my thoughts on him as a fighter, etc. I really like Keith Thurman, really like him. I tend to be sceptical of guys who get through their first 20 fights with a huge knockout ratio and very limited opposition. The reason being, I often find that these guys tend to rely on power to an extent where other elements of their game are perhaps underdeveloped, and because the level of opposition they've been in with is so low, these elements of their game don't get discovered as really poor until they step up. Now, a good example of that is David Price. He was a guy who looked absolutely devastating on the UK heavyweight scene due to his power. When he stood up even to sort of top 15 heavyweight level, he got knocked out back-to-back fights. Now, Seth Mitchell would be another example, just as we're discussing it. But that's not to say that just because you're a power puncher, it doesn't mean, you're not one to follow. I mean, Deontay Wilder recently, Sergey Kovalev, these guys have proven that sometimes the fact that they're knocking people out, the fact that they're totally reliant on their power at the lower level, they've still got these sort of hidden elements to their game. Who'd have thought that Deontay Wilder would have whitewashed Romain Stavern on points? Sergey Kovalev would have soundly outboxed Bernard Hopkins. So I think Keith Thurman is, for my eyes, falling into that category of somebody who is known for his power, somebody who has built his reputation based on his power, but is now showing that huge capability outside of just being a big puncher. And I think that's really important, because once you hit the top level of the sport, and I don't care who you are, Deontay Wilder, Sergey Kovalev, we'll run with those two as examples. When Sergey Kovalev was running through the likes of Nathan Cleverly, it looked impossible that anyone in the sport would be able to take him the distance. When Deontay Wilder was stretching out Sergey Liakovitz and leaving him flinching on the floor, it's hard to see any of his fights going the distance. But when you get towards the upper echelons of the sport, Romain Stavern, Bernard Hopkins, you end up going the distance in fights. And Keith Thurman's experienced that recently. In terms of the level of opposition he's beaten, Diego Chavez, Bundu, Guerrero, these are guys, all three of those guys I would consider top 20 welterweights. There's possibly a case that Robert Guerrero was a top 10 welterweight, although I've never really rated the Ghost as a welterweight. For me, he's a guy who's made his legacy at lower weight classes. He hasn't really got notable victories at welterweight, in my opinion, and he's a guy who's getting on a bit with no defence and a lot of miles on the clock. So in terms of the Ghost beating Robert Guerrero, I was almost more impressed by the Leonard Bundu fight than the Robert Guerrero fight. And I really like Keith Thurman. I think he's a really well-rounded individual, really well-rounded. And I think people are booing him, people are disappointed by his performance against Leonard Bundu. But I think Bundu is a very underrated fighter. He came over here to the UK. He beat Frankie Gavin, who's now fighting for the World Welterweight title. He beat Lee Purdy. Both fights he was brought in to lose. He was brought in to make the opponent look good. And both fights he was victorious. He'd never lost before, undefeated fighter, really durable, decent mover, excellent work rate. And Keith Thurman soundly outboxed him, really outboxed him. And I thought, I know it wasn't perhaps the most stylistically entertaining matchup for the casual fan, but I really like that performance. That showed to me conclusively Keith Thurman is a guy who can box for 12 rounds, who can win fights over the championship distance on points, who can maintain discipline into the later rounds. So I really liked what I saw that night. And we got a similar performance against Robert Guerrero, where he was disciplined. You got flashes of his power in both fights. I believe he knocked down both Bundu and Guerrero. But I like the fact that he was getting taken the distance. In doing that, he's answered questions about his stamina, his discipline. For me, those are positives. These are big areas of doubts I have, for example, over a fighter like Anthony Joshua. Yeah, he looks good, but how can we rate him on a world level when he's never been beyond a few rounds. Well, with Keith Thurman, we don't have those doubts. And, you got some real tests in that Robert Guerrero fight. He obviously had that hideous swelling, and he showed that he could have heart and determination to fight through that. He's an exciting, explosive fighter with, he's got hand speed, he can move, he's got good combination punching, good boxing fundamentals, excellent punch variety. You can see some real versatility there in his work, and I really, really like him. I don't, at this stage, have doubts over Keith Thurman. What I would say is, in terms of what he's proven in terms of his resume, maybe you could make strong arguments he's beaten a top 10 welterweight in Robert Guerrero. I think it would be hard for anyone to really suggest he's beaten a top 7, top 8 welterweight. And I think the difficulty of that is, with the welterweight division being so stacked, guys like Tim Bradley, Marquez, obviously Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, Amir Khan, it's hard to get these kind of fights. The guys at welterweights are such superstars. It is really hard for Keith Thurman to beat a top 5, 6, 7 welterweight, because all of these guys are pay-per-view stars who probably don't want the difficult fight that is Keith Thurman for the relatively high risk and low reward. So I'm not being critical of Keith Thurman when I say that he hasn't beaten a top 5 welterweight, because I appreciate that he hasn't had the chance to, and he'd probably love that chance. But what I am saying is, he's yet to prove himself against that level of opposition. So there still has to be a doubt. In terms of how I see him doing against those guys, I think he's very, very live against everyone at welterweight. Yeah, at this point, you'd still have to make the Floyd Mayweathers of this world a favourite against him. But Floyd versus Keith Thurman is certainly a fight that I'd like to watch. I think that's got potential to be a real, real competitive matchup. And I think Thurman is live in that fight. Again, with Keith Thurman, I need to perhaps have a more in-depth think, but I think Thurman is live against the Amir Khans, Sean Porters, Kell Brooks of this world. I think I'd probably pick him over Juan Manuel Marquez. Probably pick him over Manny Pacquiao in a tight fight right now. I think it's interesting. And I think Keith Thurman is a guy to follow for the foreseeable future. Interested to discuss. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks very much for watching. If you've got any requests you'd like to hear me discuss, do drop me an email, boxinggossip@googlemail.com. Thanks for watching.